I'm your host, Vihan, and today we're thrilled to introduce Leonard Ang, a trailblazing entrepreneur who's the CEO of Stealth, a startup that's connecting startups to job applicants, and she's the co-founder of Sip and Sail, an initiative that transforms the way founders, students, and venture capitalists connects by hosting monthly community dinners. His remarkable journey includes prestigious recognitions such as a Google FGN Fellow, a member of the PH100, a list spotlighting the brightest minds and most ambitious talents in the Philippines under the age of 30. And he's also a TEDx speaker. Alongside his entrepreneurial pursuits, Leonard is pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Leonard's story is one of ambition, determination, and passion. Today, he joins us to share his insights on entrepreneurship, how to start startups correctly, validating ideas, writing, public speaking, and much more. Leo, thank you so much for being with us on today's show.
Yeah, dude, thanks for having me, man. Great to be here.
Thank you. So, first question I wanted to ask is, you've done a lot in these past 2 years, like co-founding, being the CEO of Stealth, one of your startups, being in the PH100, talking, in TEDx, co-founding Sip and Sail. What would you say were the experiences you had before these that led you on the path that you're on today?
I think looking back, the biggest driver of everything that I've done so far has to be the curiosity and somehow this willingness to put myself in unfamiliar spaces. So I've always been the kind of person who grew up, who always asks people, like, what happens if I just go for it, right? Or what happens when you choose this kind of industry, or what happens if you go through this kind of decision. And that mindset had led me to experiment with different things, starting small projects and later on working at startups, meeting founders, and eventually launching ventures of my own. So actually, before I even got into startups, I was actually venturing into tech. So I remember like 2022. So I graduated March 2022 and my university starts September 2022. So I literally had a gap between March to September. And I was like, dude, what am I gonna do at home from like March to September? So to give you guys some background, I'm a computer science student. So I chose CS, to be honest, because I felt like I needed that job security. I wanted to kind of be employed for the longest time. But I had difficulty figuring out what the right motivation for that was, right? You take CS and you go through the program, but what should be like that underlying motivation? So I then proceeded to volunteer for tech events. So I did simple things like creating Canva pubs for speakers, registration, and that pretty much put me into this event space. It really got me into being interested in attending events, not necessarily because I am interested in tech, but because I just love doing it. I love helping out. And I guess later on, I got to meet the right people, I would say, software engineers, people with like decades of experience. And that got me to really appreciate where I am. And I guess like just segueing to that, I mean, being in Sip and Scale, launching my own startup, I would say that was really the springboard for me. I mean, if it weren't for that experience of like somebody literally offering me this opportunity to join events, then um it wouldn't have been this catalyst. So I think later on, so I guess that was like 8 months. So 8 months after that, I had this reputation in the industry or like in the community as someone who's really good at events. Like Leonard's this guy who who likes holding events and he's a good volunteer and he's a good manager. So my former teacher in my alma mater in high school, he was running a startup called Dash Labs AI. So he introduced me to two kids, who were high school students, who were also STEM high school students, by the way. Um, and they wanted to host a startup conference in a hotel. And I didn't know what a startup was back then. All I know was that two high school kids wanted me to help out with their event. So I said, yeah, okay, let's do it on a Saturday. Okay, let's go to the hotel. I'll help you guys set up. So I was there and I didn't actually have much to do. So I spent 12 hours throughout the day just listening to speakers talk about startups, talk about all these different things. And that was pretty much the start of my startup journey. That one conference, that random introduction with my old teacher to like two high school students who I never heard before. And I was pretty much put into this map of, okay, this is what a startup is and this is what it does. And yeah, that's pretty much what happened. And um, fast forward to that, I later ran this organization for young students like you. Um, so we did the organization called Young Founders Summit Philippines for literally for entrepreneurs and aspiring founders who were aged like 12 to 21 in the Philippines. So um, we did a lot of projects centered around doing workshops and exposure for like startups in the Philippines. And that was the experience. That experience really made me want to start my own thing. Because I saw like a lot of people who were younger than me doing crazy stuff like Web3, AI, even robotics, which I never thought was like a venturable thing. And yeah, from there it's pretty much been history because of that, because of all these experiences.
Wow. So you mentioned that you work with a lot of young people. So have you noticed any emerging trends about like, what fields they like to focus in or something along those lines?
I think it goes without saying that AI is the top thing right now. I mean, I've met a lot of people doing really simple projects. So I'm not sure if you've seen this, but like on LinkedIn, like there was this, I think it was a high school kid or someone younger than me. He created this like LinkedIn Wrap. It was such a simple tool. So it kind of works as like Spotify Wrap. So they get all your insights and your like reactions on LinkedIn. It was super simple. But for a young guy to create such a viral tool being used by like top CEOs, top voices on LinkedIn, like it was such a eye opener for me that AI and all these tools coming out can help someone do something as impactful as that. I think another thing, I mean, in the context of the Philippines, is a lot of people are doing, um, I would say, logistics and finance type of startups. Because I mean, the Philippines alone is kind of this haven for these kinds of things. And it's probably the most profitable sector. So, yeah, I've seen a lot of that. And I mean, elsewhere, it's been an interesting time for startups as well because you're seeing a lot of these moonshot ideas. Like, I literally met this guy. Um, he was also like a bit younger, but he was creating this robotic like startup
Mhm.
that basically he was creating robots that it's like robots for defense basically. So it was like a prototype, but it was really really cool. So I mean, young people right now are super creative, and it's really exciting to see that.
So like they're mainly focusing on like, the AI and robotics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you like personally, ventured into the AI sector, robotics space?
Yeah, so right now my current startup is in AI. So we're dealing with ed tech and AI. Um Basically we saw this gap with learning because a lot of people go into the traditional learning with the expectation that you've already mastered everything in high school. But what about for students who aren't necessarily good in a subject? There's this like knowledge gap that teachers can't really spot in a student. Like you take calculus, but like let's say I would be taking calculus, but I'm not necessarily good in algebra or my fundamentals. The teacher would have no way of doing that. So we kind of want to plug this gap of, you know, this knowledge gap and help. make learning more engaging and honestly much more productive for the students, right? I don't want to be catching up in class. I want to be like solid, rock solid learning the subject without having to worry about, hey, I have to go home and learn about algebra again before I study my lesson.
Yeah, no, I like speaking from experience as a high school student. Like, I don't really like algebra. I mean, it's simple enough, but I don't really like it. So when you say like the learning gaps, are you talking about like soft skills, like things along those lines?
It was more of hard skills. So my setup was actually based on my own personal experience. So in high school, I would take math classes and I had poor fundamentals. So like I didn't know how to factor polynomials, for example. And it was only very late where I found out that okay, this is something I have to improve on. And that pretty much carried over to high college where I was pretty much playing catch up in my freshman year. So it's mostly that because we found out that math is this ladder. It's like you start from the lowest point of the ladder, and you can't skip a step up the ladder. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to master a certain concept. So that was something that we found was an interesting thing.
Um, so the other question that I had was um like moving on our conversation along a bit. I'm sure that some of our audience members would aspire to have their own businesses at some point. And as a young CEO, you had like a multitude of experiences running all sorts of companies. And what advice would you have for someone who's like, a completely, totally fresh beginner and just starting out their entrepreneurial career?
I think first is surround yourself with people who are already in the space. You learn so much just by being in the right circles. So go to events, join online communities, and talk to founders around your area. You realize that most successful entrepreneurs aren't actually geniuses with $1 million ideas. They're just people who kept iterating and learning until something pretty much clicked. And that was really this process that I had to understand early on. Another thing is to start small, but start now. I think too many people, especially when you're just starting out, wait until they have a perfect idea. The perfect idea, the right co-founder, or even enough funding before you take action. But the reality is, just like STEM, the best way to learn is by doing. So you gotta test your ideas, talk to people, and build something, even if it's just a side project at first. Because I think the most that you're gonna be losing is probably just your time. But towards the end, you would have had enough knowledge just by building something to work in a cool company or even build things on your own, right? Just by having that experience and building something. Um, and I think last is be okay with failing. The truth is most of your ideas won't work out, especially early on. And that's completely fine. And what matters is that you keep going, you take the lessons with you, and apply them to the next thing. So entrepreneurship is all about adaptability, resilience, and the speed of which you learn. So the faster you iterate, the faster you'll find something that works.
Mhm. So, like, based on what you said, which is really solid advice, by the way, you would you say that it's like better to get things done better than to have things perfect?
Yeah, because nothing actually ever gets done perfect. Because I mean, I speak from experience because um, when I entered my first startup, I wasn't actually the CEO, so I was a COO back then, and it was my first experience working with other people on like a project, some of this magnitude. And I guess growing up, I was a perfectionist myself, and man, it took so long to get something out just because I was nitpicking every detail. But I realized that, like what you mentioned, right? What's important is that you get the most essential things done. What are the core features of your product? Like, and do you really have to nitpick on the less important parts? Like, the size of the font, the colors of this thing, right? And these are the things I really took into like too much attention on later on. And I found out that the people that you're selling this to, they don't care about that. They only care about how this product solves the problem that they're facing. And that's something that you should really zero on as early as, when you start doing things early on, just so that you won't waste time. Because startups are all about speed and how disruptive you can be.
Mm, that's some really solid advice. Just another question. So I noticed, like personally, that a lot of startups, like they fail like really early on, and there's a very, very high risk of failing. So from your experience, why would you say that a lot of these startups fail? What are they missing?
The number one thing is that you build something that people don't need. A lot of people build stuff because it's cool. It's a cool idea. You build project management tools, but then you end up doing research later. So like, for example, Notion, Obsidian. If you're not able to conduct a good um, analysis of the competitive landscape, like not just here in the Philippines, right, or even in Canada, but all over the world. How can I, after you've built something, how can this compete against the bigger players? Like, if I build a PM software, how does this compete with like Asana, Notion? And you only find out late towards that point where okay, you've built something cool, but then towards the end, it's really hard to like sell the product, right? And I think going back to my first point, it's not talking to users. How do you know that something you've built solves the needs of the people that you're targeting, right? Um, for instance, I mean, for my startup, we spoke to dozens of students because we wanted to make sure that our product addresses the needs of students and not the other way around, that it doesn't address our needs. Um, and that's a really valuable skill that you guys need to learn. Is that don't rush things too much. I mean, go through that long and hard process of talking to people, preparing questions, targeted questions, and getting to know your ideal customer profile, which is an ICP, as we would call it. And I think the last one would be not not choosing the right co-founder.
Mhm.
And I want to stress on this because um, too many people, I would say, choose a co-founder just because they check all the boxes. Like they're technically proficient. Um, they are really good with operations and business. But what I found from my personal experience was that the best co-founder, yes, complements your weaknesses, but they are the ones that that you've known for quite some time. Like people who you are friends with, people not necessarily friends with, but people that you've worked with for quite some time and you know them in and out. Like you know that this person has this kind of tendencies and that you guys have had some sort of communication. Because I've seen that some people they want to get co-founders who can build stuff fast. But then towards the latter part, I mean when you guys earn money, right? And when you guys are in the stage of accelerating, things
Mhm.
fizzle out because in the middle you're like, this person isn't exactly as passionate as I am with this problem and this product. And it's too late. It's too late already. It's too late to turn back because the thing's been built and you're at this stage already when you're going out of the market. So yeah, those are the three things I would say.
Wow, wow. And like, what you said about the like choosing co-founders. I'm afraid this may be the wrong analogy, but it sounds like sort of like, being in a relationship with someone, because
Yeah.
you gotta know the person first and then, ensure that you don't fizzle out. So the other question that I had was it's not so I want to ask you this, but also like I want to ask for the audience as well. If you feel comfortable like answering this, like go ahead. But have you been, has there been a moment in your life where you felt vulnerable or uncertain about your path ahead? And how would you say that experience ultimately contributed to your growth to who you are today?
Yeah, actually, there was a time early on when I felt completely out of place, or what you would call imposter syndrome. I think that's the thing that most of us in Gen Z would like to say.
Yeah.
I think the first thing was attending my first startup event. So, like, I remember not like having zero credentials, and the only thing I would tell people was that, hey, I'm a student at this university. And being in a room with experienced founders and investors, I remember really thinking, like, why am I even here? Like, I didn't have the credentials. I wasn't running a company with millions of funding compared to they are. And I didn't feel like I had anything to contribute in that conversation. And that feeling of imposter syndrome that I mentioned stuck with me for quite some time. It made me really hesitant, to be honest, to share my ideas, and ask for help with to like people around me. But over time, I noticed something really interesting, which is that a lot of people I looked up to, I mean, in these events or even externally, they also felt like they didn't belong at some point. And the difference was that they didn't let it stop them. So that was a turning point. The turning point was that I realized that no one really starts as an expert, right? I mean, every founder, investor, or successful entrepreneur has had moments where they felt lost, maybe lost or maybe unqualified. And I think the key thing is just you have to keep showing up. You have to keep learning, and you have to keep putting yourself in situations where, although it's difficult, it's a situation where you can grow. And another experience that really shaped me was my first real failure, I would say. Um, I think one of our early projects was something not a startup related, but it's a community related project. So I poured months into it, and it didn't work out. It was a flop. Like it was a mess, and it was very hard for me to not take it personally. But looking back, I was grateful for it because I think that when we're young, we feel like failure is this big wall, insurmountable wall that we can't climb over. But it showed me that failure, failing fast, was better than dragging something out that isn't working, and that somehow every setback that you encounter, whether it's startup related, academic related, is a step towards something much better that you may not be seeing right now. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, that's like those are some like really really good points, man. And like when you talk about stuff like imposter syndrome, like personally, I myself, I've experienced it a lot, and I'm really sure that some of our audience members have too. And the point where you say about like failure as well, like failure just ends up making you more resilient in the end, right? Yeah. The other question I wanted to ask is, um, like you're a very prolific and very proficient writer, and I was just curious, like what led you, to start writing early on, and how was that, writing, like how was writing as an experience for you?
I think writing really started as a way for me to process my own thoughts. I mean, I was writing for the school paper. It was called Stallion back in my high school. I wrote for the features department, so I was writing about basketball, local events, because I always thought that when I force myself to sit down and try to articulate something clearly, it forces me to think more deeply about it. But what really changed was actually during the pandemic. It was the first time where I ever considered writing publicly, like on Medium, Substack, and I think you're also a writer, right, on Medium as well. Um,
I mean, I write every now and then.
yeah, so I think over time, I realized that writing was also a way to scale my ideas, meaning that instead of having the same conversations over and over again, I could write something once and let it reach people beyond my immediate network. Uh, and actually, one of the best things I found was that when you write things publicly, even though it's subject to a lot of disagreement, it attracts like-minded people. Like I've had interesting connections with people um, who came from different backgrounds. Like we would converse about like history, politics, philosophy, all these kinds of things. And I remember that it was so profound and it was very enriching to be able to find people who had the same interests as you. And I think it's a reminder that putting your thoughts out there in the world can open doors in ways that you won't you don't expect, right? So I guess some advice for some people who want to write, um, just write anyway. Um, I don't think there's a qualification in writing. As long as you have a good idea, you have a voice, then go ahead, right? You don't need to be an expert to share your own experiences and insights because I think that we all have our own interesting story to tell. And the more you write and the more you clarify your own thinking, you never know who might find value in your words. Um, I remember that I was writing about mental health because I think there was a time when I had a really bad breakup. So
Oh.
people who was reading my articles, they found a lot of solace, I would say. And that was really one of those inspirations just for me to keep writing. Because I found out that people really valued what you experienced, and people also share the same experiences.
So you would say that like writing is pretty much a way to extend, like, pretty much like package who you are and, like share it with the world as it is. And I think that's like really, really profound. And you also mentioned, writing as a way to like articulate your thoughts. So I'm curious, do you like happens to, journal as well?
Yeah, so I journal in the morning. Although during at night, I'm trying to build a habit on it. So like I found out that brain dumping, that is like brain dumping in the morning, like just articulating your thoughts on paper with like no prompt is kind of like this. It's been an interesting way to see how your thoughts flow, what they, see your ideas come about. And I found out that in terms of articulating your ideas, being able to write them helps you structure your thoughts better, right? Um, if somebody were to ask you, what are you grateful for today? Like, again, in person, I think you would have a much more deeper realization, a deeper answer because you've written about it before and you've thought about it really deeply. And I think this really just extends to different aspects as well. When you're talking to other people about an idea, I think it helps. It also helps that you write in order for you to remember and in order for you to say it in a very articulate manner to other people.
So like writing would be a way to like ground who you are so you don't,
Yeah.
like wander around with your
Hmm.
words. That's really solid. Um the other question I want to ask, like you write a lot as well, but you're also a public speaker because like last year you were speaking at a TED Talk, and I was curious, what's it like, to be on a stage in front of like everyone, and how would you combat fears of, like blanking out or like a stage fright? Is there like a secret that you know and we don't?
Yeah, dude, I think you mentioned it well. Like first thing I would tell you is that I am a stage fright. Like I grew up as a stage fright, and I think I'm always gonna be a stage fright. Um, but I think the first thing I realized about public speaking is that it's never about you. The audience isn't there to judge how well you memorize a script, to judge how well your deck is built, um, to judge, you know, to judge what your mannerisms are on stage. But they're there because they want to learn something. They woke up early to go to the event, because they want to hear something new from you. And I realized that this perspective really helped me a lot. So instead of thinking to myself, what if I messed up? What if I mess up on stage? What if I forget my lines? I started thinking about how can I make this presentation of mine as valuable as possible for people listening. So for my TED talk, I prepared like crazy. Uh, I crammed the whole preparation in 2 weeks, because the moderator, who was my former teacher, he was looking for like a speaker who was experienced in like youth empowerment and technology. And yeah, he pretty much gave me just 2 weeks to prepare. Um, but at the same time, I was also trying to. I mean, even though it's crammed, I also tried to make sure that I wasn't just reciting something out of the blue, because I wanted to make it feel natural, which I think is the best advice I could give you. When you're doing public speaking, do it as if you're talking to a friend rather than you're delivering a lecture. And I think when you're dealing with nerves, the best thing is to prepare. Um, the better you know your material, I think the less anxious you feel. Um, and it's also a good reminder for yourself to pause, rephrase something, even though it's completely off script. And even to acknowledge sometimes if you forget something. Because people actually connect more with your authenticity on stage rather than if you were to appear completely perfect. So I think when you step on stage, you need to ask yourself two things. One is, am I being clear? If people walk away from the event, do they understand the key idea that I'm trying to deliver? And if so, yeah, then I've done my job. And the second is, am I being genuine? Am I being real? Like, am I not trying to fabricate anything from my own experiences? Um, I think that the best TED talks on the internet aren't the most polished. Um, they're the ones that make you feel the most human. Good one is actually by Steve Jobs, his commencement speech. It's not a TED talk, but that story really clicked onto me. Yeah.
No, yeah, I also saw like the Steve Jobs TED Talk too. That was something else, man. That was like genuinely. But also the advice you give, be your authentic self. Like don't like just play yourself off of a script, and also like give values to others. I think that's some like really like that's some amazing advice, man. Thank you. Um, the other question that I had is that you're the co-founder of Sip and Skill. So I was curious, like, how do you find ideas for all your companies? Like, what is your do you have like a method to find those things, or do you randomly, does it just pop into your head? And what advice would you have for like someone who's trying to find their own idea?
I think it would really just boil down to personal experience and word of mouth. So I guess for Sip and Scale, I mean, for those who don't know, Sip and Scale is basically a uh, it's basically like a once a month dinner, simple networking dinner that we host for students, aspiring founders, and founders to come together. Uh, and we got the idea because it was from our own personal experience. So when me and my co-founder Sharon, shout out to Sharon, when we were starting out in the startup space, we found out here in the Philippines that almost all the events felt very exclusive. I mean, they were exclusive from the get go, and they also felt very transactional because, I mean, for us like students who had no idea what to do, we didn't know how to navigate um, the industry yet. We didn't know all these jargon, so we basically were like, what if we did something different? Like, what if instead of doing something super structured, super rigid, we could create this space where people could just talk, share ideas, and actually build relationships. And I think this really extends to all the different startup ideas, right? With Facebook, with Instagram, how can we make people connect with each other? How can we bring the world together? And I feel like this extends to different things, right? If you see a problem around you, like whether it's a big national societal problem or it's a problem within in your life that you see your friends, families, classmates, teachers facing, then maybe it's something to look at, right? The idea that you have may not necessarily be venturable. This may not necessarily build money, but make money. But you can always nitpick that idea, and really fine tune it a little bit. Um, so I think another thing is that, I mean, going back to sip and scale, we yeah we decided to make this space this very casual space, and we also had our own form of MVP. So have you ever heard of a physical MVP? Like a
A physical.
non-software MVP? Yeah,
I mean, I've heard of it. Like, I heard that
yeah,
there's like one washing machine where it was like
yeah,
just a guy cleaning out the spoons.
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah.
yeah. So our physical MVP is not hardware or software. So our physical MVP was the first dinner that we hosted in the Philippines. It was our form of testing that idea. So we kept it small. We invited some good friends who were founders and also some friends of ours from university. And things just happened naturally and people loved it. So if you guys are finding business ideas, I want to, well, boil it down to three things. Is that first, solve a problem that you deeply understand. Sip and scale and everything that we've pretty much done worked, or kind of worked, because we built something that we wish existed for ourselves. Um, Second thing is to start small and test quickly. So don't overthink it. Just put it out there and learn from like response from people. Like you can beta test it. You can give it to some friends and family to test it out. They just see what they see what their vibes are like. What do they think? And um, pretty much just keep iterating. Like I mentioned earlier, keep iterating from the whole idea. Don't stick that idea, and just base it on from existing feedback, even though they deviate from the original plan. So more often than not, the businesses around you guys today, the big corporations, tech companies, they came from people spotting something broken, fixing it, and then just scaling the solution.
Damn. So if we just like follow those three things, we'd had a pretty solid idea of like what we should, have with our business. Thank you for that, man. Um, my other question is that another startup that you run is Stealth, and it's like a company that connects like job seekers to stealth startups. So, for my curiosity and that of the audience, what exactly is a stealth startup, and why would a startup need to, become a stealth startup?
So a stealth startup is basically a company that deliberately stays under the radar while it's building its product. Some startups want to operate in stealth because they have a unique or a highly competitive idea that they don't want to reveal too soon to the market or to immediate competitors. And oftentimes they do that because they want to iterate and experiment without the public pressure. Um, so at least from a founder point of view, stealth mode is actually a powerful tool to an extent if you use it correctly. It allows you to move fast. You can also pivot when needed, and you can also avoid competitors from copying your ideas if it's really unique before you're ready. So, but at some point, every startup has to come out of stealth. So the key is to know when to shift from building quietly to scaling loudly, I would say.
So, in a sense, that it would like, when you talk about like, being stealthy in a sense, it's kind of like, pardon if this is the wrong analogy, but it sounds kind of like, warfare tactics in a sense. Um, and like my last and final question that I have, this is like pretty philosophical, so I don't expect, everyone to give like, a direct straight answer, but you've done a lot in your life. until now, and you're a very young dude. Would you say that it would like be better to focus on like financial freedom, or would it be better, focus on your passion, on like following your ideas and goals?
That's a good question. I think I think it can go both ways. I mean, financial freedom to some extent is something that I would say we're all going after. Uh, I mean, I wanted to do startups because there's an unlimited potential for income. But at the same time, you can also help other people. So I think it's just a case to case basis. I mean, depending on your situation and what you're really after, what your values are. But I would say that I really started with my passion. Um, what was I really passionate about? What was I really keen on solving? What are these issues in our society that I wanted to address? Um, and because of this idea that I became passionate about doing things to bring people together and to somehow make people's experiences more streamlined, I would say. I then forgot about financial freedom totally. I just told myself I want to do this project not for the money, but because I want to do something for people. I want to make an impact in our community, not because of the clout, not because of the money, but because I genuinely want to see people benefiting from what I'm doing, no matter how much time it takes. And um I feel like if it works, then maybe you can think about the financial side. I mean, I'm speaking from like a community side of thing, but um definitely it goes from case to case basis, right? From a community standpoint, I think value should always come first. But from a company, it should be a balance. I mean, you should always think about, is this idea gonna sell? Is it going to make a lot in the future? And is this problem something that people is this an actual problem that people care so much about that they're willing to pay for your thing, your solution. So it's a it's a good balance. It should be a good balance. Never one side, never on the other side. But if you're doing something like an advocacy or a community thing, then 100% go for value, go for your passion.
Yeah, so like pretty much what you're saying is that it would really depend on the context of where you
Yeah.
are. Like if you're the CEO, you need to be balanced. If you're doing it yourself, you focus on the passion and then go after, the financial stuff. And I think that would be, some like really solid advice for a lot of us, who are like, starting out our own journeys.
Yeah. I think it's
And
like it's more dependent on what you want to do actually. Because if you want to it really depends on like, I'm gonna be doing this project. Um, what am I gonna be doing after this project, right? What are your goals of doing things, basically? Like, did you do this thing because you wanted to earn a lot, or did you do this because you really wanted to help people? I think it should be something that you figure out. I mean, where's the compass taking you, right? So
mhm.
yeah, I think it's different for everyone.
so So you're also saying that like the values are also an important part. So there's a lot of
Yeah,
factors that would go into
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
like and this is like a pretty philosophical question. And I think like, everything you like, your like what you just said is again like really guiding advice for a lot of us. And like, thank you so much for that. And with that, like I
Yeah.
would with that, I'd like to thank you so much for, taking your time to be with us on the show. Thank you so much, Leo.
Good. Thanks for having me, man. Hopefully we can meet in person soon.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. I would be really down for that. Thank you for listening in on today's episode. If you wish to see more interviews like this, please feel free to like and follow if you've enjoyed today's episode. As always, our email is listed in the description where additional details are also listed. Thank you so much and have a pleasant St. Patrick's Day for those of you who celebrate it. This is your host, Vihan, signing off.